Okay, so here we are in Flow, and this is where we're going to start to really ramp things up and kind of really dive in here. So I thought of a couple of different ways on how to approach this. I thought, okay, either I can do the whole thing in one shot, or I can break it down into smaller chunks. And I decided to break it down into smaller chunks because I think that's a better way to learn. So what I'll do is I'll do an initial video for Flow. I'll do one that covers some graph components, and then after that, we'll put the whole thing together. So let's start here with Flow. So what we want to do here is we're going to go to My Flows. Now here's some things I've done for testing previously. Let's just ignore that for now. But we'll start with a new flow. So we'll go to Create from Blank. Okay, so Create from Blank. Now we want to basically start this flow when an item is entered into that calendar. So I can type in SharePoint. Okay, so we'll start when an item is created. Okay, so now site address and list name. So now we can come back over to here and we can grab this from our site that we just created. So here it is. Right. Okay, so here's our site, and let's just make sure we know what the list is called. Site contents, it was called out of office. Okay, so let's go back here. So here's our site address name. Okay, that's good. Now, this might come up. It might say no values matching your search. That's okay. I don't really know why it does that. It's not a big deal. It will resolve. It'll be fine. So let's just go ahead and now see it's saying to enter custom value. That piece is a little bit finicky, but just enter your custom value as your site name. And then we want to go to enter custom value for list name. And this was called out of office. There we go. Right, out of office, yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, so that's going to be our starting point. And now we'll go to new step. And this is going to be, we want to get the item. So I'll search for get item. Okay, so you'll see get items plural and get item. You want to go to get item. And if you've ever worked with SharePoint Designer or Nintex workflows or any of those other tools, this is kind of the equivalent of getting the current item. So this is just how it's done using Flow. So essentially what we want to do now is we're going to enter in the same information here. So again, so site address, so enter custom value, that's fine, there we go. List name, enter custom value, and this was out of office. Okay, so next up, it's going to ask, okay, which ID do you want to get? So you'll see here in the dynamic content, if you just click ID, that's going to grab the ID of the current item, basically. So that's what you want to do for that. And now we'll save. Okay. So next up, I'm going to create a few variables. You don't have to create all these variables because you can actually get them just within the item context, but I'm going to go ahead and make them anyways, just because it's easier to kind of, or I think it's a good way to sort of practice creating your flow. So let's go to new step and we'll go to variable. So there's a number of options here. So we're going to go to initialize variable. Okay, and we're going to call this SharePoint initialize title variable. Oops. And this is going to be a string. And now, so again, we see the dynamic content. So we're going to have the options available from our previous step. So because we've got our item, here's the values or the fields we can grab from that item. So we want to actually go ahead and get the title. So if I come down here to title, there we go. And that's going to set that variable to the value of the title. Perfect. And actually, I did sort of mess this up. We want to actually call this title. This is going to be the variable name, actually. So Don't mind that little typo there. And then we'll rename the actual step here to SharePoint initialize variable. So to clarify, the name of the variable is title, and we're going to call the step SharePoint initialize title variable. So that'll do that. Okay, so now we're going to go to new step again. And now we're going to go to variable once again, initialize variable. So same process here. We're going to call this, let's call this one requester display name. Okay. And this is going to grab the value that we entered into our requester. If you remember during our earlier testing, we entered in Joe Smith and also Joe Carter, a lot of Joes at our company. We'll call this string. Value is going to be the, now I should see this value down here, requester display name. There we go. That's going to grab the display name for us. Okay, great. Now, it's always a good practice to make sure you name these steps properly, because if you have a very complex flow, it can get very confusing. Variable, okay. And then one more, we're going to also grab our requester email. Initialize variable. And so we're going to get the requester email. That's our variable name. Type is going to be string, and value is going to be, and again, I can just search here. So requester email, there it is. And we'll call this SharePoint initialize requester email variable. Oops, variable. And that's great for that. Okay. So now we have that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to create our variables that are relevant to the app that we created in Azure earlier. So I'm going to stop here for the initial flow setup, and we're going to dive into some graph components next. And then after that, we're going to come back and finish our flow. So I'm going to pause it here, and we'll cover some graph components right now.